Tonight on Community Connections, we're going to be talking about television in the 21st century in Long Branch and beyond. I'd like to welcome to Community Connections on this side of the camera, Robin Kampf and Don Swanson. Thank you both for coming.
Thank you.
Not exactly a big journey for either one of you since you're both employed here at Monmouth University.
It's true.
That's right.
It's very true.
Don, you're the head of the communications department.
Right.
And Robin, you are a teacher, a special professor. You were telling me you teach something called media literacy?
I teach a course called Media Literacy.
And what does that mean?
It is a sociological look at how the media influences us and our culture.
And does it? I mean,
Absolutely.
what I watch on TV has an impact on me later on?
Yes.
Could you explain that a little more fully?
Well, I think it would be interesting to go to another planet and see them watching what our television is all about, to get a perspective of what we're all about, because it's truly a reflection of our society.
Well, actually,
and our
you don't
culture.
even have to, you know, when you said that, go to another planet, Michael Moore in Bowling for Columbine showed the difference between a news program from Canada and one from, I think he showed Michigan, because he's from Michigan. Totally different. You wouldn't believe you're watching from the same planet.
Oh, the media is different and regulated differently, and different expectations in different nations. We were really lucky this semester. We had a woman by the name of Dr. Ines Abu Youssef, who is the chair of the media department at the University of Cairo. She was here as a Fulbright professor, and she lectured to our students and told them about how media in Egypt is different. It's very important and very powerful, but the government has a lot of control over some of the things that get talked about. You know, we pride ourselves obviously on the freedom of expression, and we think that, or we have always consistently thought that the media is very important in getting information to the public. I have some real misgivings about what's happened in recent years.
Tell me what they are.
Well, for one thing is we have this explosion, this plethora of media choices. And I'm in charge of a course called Critical Discourse, a general education required course for all students at Monmouth. And they come in and they
All
have...
students, not just in your department?
No, all students, yeah. And they have to come in and be ready to analyze, talk about, debate public issues. You know, they look at us like, well, current events, what is that? Because they have, their choices today are, they can pay only attention on television to things that are pop culture, that really serve they never watch news. If they do, it's on comedy television.
John, well...
So you know, I mean, what we have a lot more choices today, but I say we're fragmented. Everybody pays specific attention to what they're interested in. I mean, you know, I was talking to somebody the other day who said when he went home, he was frustrated because his wife was always watching a home and garden show or home and garden channel or a decorating channel or something like that when he wanted to watch sports or news or whatever. And so there was, but you know, when we have so many channel choices, that's the case. And back when I was a kid, and when I first was doing this, we just had, you know, what, 13 channels or something?
2, 4, 7, 9, 11,
And
13.
everybody watched the evening news at 6 o'clock or whatever time. Well, today, the network evening news has a small audience, and the average age of that audience is in the mid-60s. So, you know, it's really, the young people coming up today have been influenced much differently by media than probably any of us were here.
Let me ask you, your class, if you said Walter Cronkite to them, they know who he is?
Blank stare.
Yeah, probably that name they may know.
Yeah.
Katie Couric.
Yeah, but she got her start, well, not her start, but she was on the Today Show, which is
Not
an
exactly,
entertainment type
not
of a
hard
program.
news.
Right.
Although I did watch election results on CBS to watch her because of her interview with Sarah Palin.
Right.
I mean, which was actually a moment when TV news had an impact on what people thought in this past election.
Yeah.
And you see that also. What's intriguing today is you mentioned that interview with Sarah Palin. That was played over and over and over again, bits and pieces of it in various cable shows, especially in the
internet.
comedy shows, especially in things like Saturday Night Live, The Daily Show, and it was blasted all over on YouTube and on the internet.
That's where I
so all of
I
a
saw
sudden,
most
all
of
of
it.
these different media outlets influenced people, and so you had, I mean, we had some students when we did our Debate Watch program here who were just avid Sarah Palin fans because they looked, they were reacting to her the same way they would react to a pop singer.
That's a frightening thought to me.
Yeah.
I don't know how else to react to that. I mean, we live in an era, I'm something of a dinosaur. I still read a newspaper in the morning.
There's not many people that do that.
I get 2 of them delivered in the
I
morning.
get 2 delivered, I do too. Yeah.
And I read them with my coffee, partly because there are things, for example, in the Asbury Park Press that are not easily accessible on their website. I'm also fearful of spilling my coffee on my laptop. I'm serious. That's, and I like newspapers. I like to read. I like books.
Yeah.
But I think Jon Stewart is probably, in the age group that you guys teach, probably the most respected newscaster
Absolutely.
on the Comedy Channel.
Absolutely. That's where they're getting their news from.
Yeah, and it's infotainment. It has an information base, but it's entertainment. And if that's done well, it can have some real impact.
I think he does it. I mean, I'm a fan of The Daily Show. I don't watch it all the time, but I mean, certainly, we just saw one of the more interesting campaigns we will ever see, and between being able to watch things on YouTube, including the Katie Couric interview with Sarah Palin. She reads all the newspapers. I mean, that was just a moment. You're like looking there going, where'd they find this woman? But where Jon Stewart and Katie Couric helped debunk that theory, and in the end, young people did not vote for her, although she had something of a rock star following.
The thing that bothers me a little bit as someone who teaches political communication also is that today, though, we have people will motivate towards those cable news channels that only really give information on their point of view. At least
they're looking
or opinion. I shouldn't
Yes.
even say information. Give opinion on their point of view, and that's even more true in talk radio. I mean, you have talk radio hosts who have large followings and make a lot of money that are really, they're not really concerned so much about being accurate as the old journalistic principles said. They're only concerned about saying what they know their listeners want to hear.
Red meat for their audience.
Yeah, which means a lot of distortion, and sometimes they frankly just make things up.
Right. And I don't think that the average person can distinguish between what's truly news and what's subjective type programming. Fox News, for example, we report, you decide. I think that the...
You don't buy into that.
No, I don't. But the average person who is not media literate or is on the path of media literacy but has not gotten there yet is going to think that it's truly a news show, when in fact it's not anything like a news show.
It's the old advertising principle that came out decades ago: advertise against your weakness. So when they say, we report, you decide, most of us who look at the studies of how accurate they are just chuckle, because it's not the truth. But people will hear it enough. The thing is, we have what we call social truths. If something is repeated often enough, then people will believe it.
Is that kind of the corollary to the political axiom, perception is reality?
Yeah.
No, and no, perception isn't reality.
No, it isn't reality, but people vote on it or make decisions or behave on it. In political communication, it gets very frustrating when people hold on to certain beliefs and attitudes and ideas that are old and outworn and don't make sense anymore, don't fit reality. It's very frustrating for politicians to try to overcome those, but we repeat them, and they become sometimes campaign themes that are often repeated. But that becomes some of the red meat for some of the people on the cable news shows or on radio talk shows that keep doing that. And so I think it's become more challenging for people who are serious about wanting to be well informed to use broadcast television to be informed. Because there is one other thing that's happened, and that is that the programming format for news has become so much briefer that when you listen to the evening news, you just get little tiny snippets of a story, maybe 8 to 15 to 20 seconds about a story, not the minute and a half, 2 minute, 3 minute programming that was on there 20 or 30 years ago.
Well, I was going to say, is it, take any complex issue, be it the build-up to the war in Iraq, a national issue, the use of eminent domain in Law and Branch, a local issue with national implications. Can you possibly cover those in a minute?
No.
No.
And so they went out and, for example, in the eminent domain issue, they went out and covered this case. It was, what, in Connecticut or something that had no relevance whatsoever to what happened in Long Branch, and they kept hammering that. Part of it, I would also fault, and probably would do that, say that a lot of it is the fault of news producers who don't know what they're doing. Well, for a lot of the local TV broadcasts.
Well, it also becomes, who are we trying to pitch it to? I mean, I don't think it's unfair to say the New York Times is looking to one audience and a local weekly is looking at another. And how complex can you do, how much do you have to know about a topic before you start to present it? I mean, I actually thought one of the best TV pieces about what was going on in Long Branch was done by a bunch of students at Montclair State University. They did a 10-minute piece, and they did some thorough interviewing of both sides, and they used what television has, which is pictures.
Sure. Right. And what we teach students to do in journalism and in journalistic broadcasting here is that they have to look at the history and the background and have some understanding of the issue before they report it. And I frankly think that's what's missing sometimes in some of the very brief news, well, most of the brief news reports we get. And the reporting on the eminent domain in so many areas frustrated me because it didn't look at the historical background.
Well, I actually had that argument and discussion with a number of reporters, including one from the New York Times, who I almost hung up on. When she said, I don't have time, I have a deadline, I said, then why are you wasting my time?
Right. Yeah. And most of the time, a lot of your time is spent bringing them up to speed on and giving them the historical background of a story. Most reporters, they come and they go. They're not the beat reporters anymore where they cover a beat and they pretty much know the history.
Yeah.
Now, some people will say, though, however, with the ability to do all the searching for information on the internet that's available today, to do a Google search, that maybe they can sit at their desk and do it rather than come out and interview. But of course, that's
very subjective too.
Yeah.
Right. All right. Well, we're going to take a short break, and we'll come back for the second half of the show.
When I found out my jeans were made using child labor in sweatshops, I wrote a letter to the company saying, reconsider your labor practices. A few months later, I get a letter back saying, thanks for being a loyal customer, and they included a coupon for a 25% discount on their jeans. So I got smart, wrote letters every day to all the stores that carry the brand, asking them to stop supporting the companies who use child labor in sweatshops. And I just kept getting letters back, thanking me for my concerns, and more coupons for more discounts on more jeans. So I'm telling my friend about it, and she flips out, saying that between all the letters and coupons, some paper company cut down a small forest, driving off 2 indigenous tribes, hundreds of endangered animals, killing thousands of plant species, some of which may have contained vaccines for HIV, cancer, and syphilis. Meanwhile, the guys cutting down the trees are 13-year-old kids who will work night and day for months just to save up enough money to buy a pair of jeans made by child labor in sweatshops.
We were talking during the break about the consolidation in the media industry. And you told me, you asked me a question, what is it that how'd you put it, television stations have to sell? Or?
I said, I asked what the number one product that a television station or a radio station, for that matter, sells.
And the answer was, which I got wrong, was?
Audiences.
Right, meaning what?
Meaning that it's a business. First and foremost, they're there to make money. And TV stations have programming to bring in audiences, and then they sell those respective audiences to their advertisers.
Is that necessarily a bad thing? I mean, a television station, a newspaper, if they don't make money, they're going to go out of business. And you know, we're seeing, I mean, the Chicago Tribune and the Los Angeles Times. Chicago Tribune's been in business for a long time. It may be gone in another year or so.
Do I think it's a bad thing? No, but what I always tell my students is to, rather than be pessimistic, to be skeptical, and to, as media consumers, to spread out. And if you're going to watch television news, get it from several sources. If you're going to read newspapers, read several newspapers. If you're going to go on the internet and consume news that way, go to several different sites.
But don't most of, well, go ahead.
No, I was just going to expand upon what you were saying about media consolidation, because basically if you connect the dots, even in our market here, in the number one television market in the country, if you connect the dots, you'll see that there's the ownership is becoming less and less. It's the same people own the same media.
I mean, what it used to be that there were really firm guidelines that the FCC had set, so that the same companies couldn't own all the major media in a major city.
Right.
Those went away with the much of that by the Telecommunication Act of 1996. A lot of those things went away, and so this is when you had what some people would say was the destruction of local radio, because radio stations were bought up by big companies like Clear Channel and others, and they immediately wiped out local news in many of these markets, and in fact they just run them digitally from a central location.
Sure.
And there's nobody really at the station. So
happened in Long Branch.
Yep. And to a degree, this is happening in the television industry and so forth, the consolidation. What's happened, I mean, if you look at it politically, starting in the 80s with Ronald Reagan's appointments to the FCC, they started listening very carefully to the industry and doing what they wanted to do, the FCC did, and deregulating, and not thinking about, supposedly about the consumer, but thinking more about what did the companies want.
Ronald Reagan's henchman is now the head of Fox News, Roger Ailes.
Right.
Oh, sure,
Roger Ailes.
yeah.
And so, as someone who doesn't watch, proudly does not watch Fox News, for my information, you know, it played hand in hand to what happened in this country over the last 8 years in the Bush administration.
But what you have with Fox News, or to some degree today with MSNBC on the other side of the political spectrum, you have programming, infotainment programming that serves a particular audience. And as long as you can sell a lot of advertising for that, which is important, that works. But where I go to get a lot of my good information in broadcasting is public television, because you still have public television that's not beholden to advertisers. In other nations like Great Britain, in Canada, all over Europe, you have public broadcasting that people depend on for balanced, objective information. For some reason, Americans sort of got out of the habit of paying a lot of attention to public TV. But if you listen to the Lehrer Report in the evening, or you listen to Charlie Rose doing his in-depth interview of people who are,
But does the consumer want that? I mean, the number one newspaper, we were talking about that, is USA Today, a Gannett publication that maybe I sound, conceited, but can it possibly take someone more than 5 minutes to go through it?
No. When it first came out, it was called McNewspaper because it was the quick.
Not a bad sports page, but if you're looking for news about New Jersey, there's 2 paragraphs, and occasionally a good national story, but that's not what they're trying to sell you.
I think with respect to broadcasting, radio and television, I think we've lost sight of the fact that television stations are licensed by or under the FCC, and those licenses come up for renewal every 8 years. And when they come up for renewal, what the station has to demonstrate is how they've served the public good. So in addition to providing entertainment and programming for us and information, they've got to provide a certain public service as well. And I think that we've lost sight of that. I mean, they are using the public airwaves, all of our public airwaves, and they're not. I don't believe that they're living up to the letter of their licenses.
Which is the public good.
Yeah, do they have public programming or public affairs type programming? Yes, but it's typically on Saturday or Sunday morning during hours when people are not even up yet. I just think that it's gone the way of too much into the business end of it rather than
And
why it was initially there was, and that was to serve the public good.
And in terms of the public good or what the public knows about, I think the glaring example of that is how ignorant most of us were of issues in the Middle East or of foreign affairs just before 9/11, which I think enabled some very, very disastrous decision making because people didn't understand the cultures there, they didn't understand how people thought. And part of the reason for that was that the foreign correspondents who used to work there were laid off, or they closed their news bureaus all over the world because the public only kind of it's a vicious cycle.
Right.
If people are only interested in domestic news, then that's all you cover, so you get more market share, but you're leaving a lot out. So the only place you're going to get the news you really need to know is on another source like public TV.
But don't you think that most of us look for reaffirmation when we look for the news?
Sure.
We want to go read and watch the people we agree with. So I'm looking for columnists to read during this last election. I'm looking for guys who are more of a liberal bent, be it E.J. Dionne from the Washington Post or Paul Krugman from the Times, and I'm going online now and I'm reading those guys. I mean, they don't come out and say we're supporting Obama, but it was pretty clear. A guy like me is not going to Fox News, but isn't that sense of I want somebody who tells me I'm right in my opinion? Isn't that who I want my news from?
Well, I think that's what we've become used to, and we accept that, and we have no other expectations. 40 years ago, 30, 40 years ago with news, that's not how it was. I mean, you look at guys like Walter Cronkite.
Huntley Brinkley report.
Yeah.
I mean, compare it to what we see today. It's night and day.
I'm your average guy. I mean, I'm not home most of the time for the network news, but when I am, I don't watch it. I mean, I did watch Dan
Well, the reality is people have more limited time, so they go to the thing they want. But it's frightening when you hear people, or when you take a look at opinion surveys that show that still there's 20 to 30% of the public who believes that Saddam Hussein had weapons of mass destruction, or the same percentage that believes that President-elect Obama is a Muslim. I mean, if they listen to certain crackpot radio talk show hosts or something that repeat those distortions over and over and over again, pretty soon they believe it.
And that's what's so important. And again, that's another thing that I tell my students is that you've got to go to different sources to get news and get information, or otherwise you're going to have the same.
Where do you go?
I read, and I hate to say it, but I'm now reading newspapers online.
Why do you hate to say that?
Well,
that's not a bad thing.
Well,
because you're not actually giving them $1 a day for their subscription?
No, I just think that I guess I'm a purist when it comes to journalism. I'd like to sit there, or I used to like to sit there and read my newspaper.
You miss the ink on your fingers?
Yes.
Well, I do
exactly.
both. I mean, I actually, I read the Times, which, one of the things when you were saying that about the war in Iraq, the New York Times wrote a 20-page expose on their own poor coverage of the build-up to the war in Iraq.
They criticized themselves.
They had the reporter Miller, who went to jail, but they ended up being extremely embarrassed by her.
Yep.
Not because she went to jail, which appeared to be honorable at the time, but actually.
Well, serious journalists, I think
they had problems.
They all agree that they were caught up in the popular culture phase of whatever, that fervor that happened after 9/11 that caused everyone to kind of overlook certain inconvenient truths.
The details.
Yeah. I mean, there were a lot of
technicalities.
Arabists in the State Department who could tell you what was really happening over there, and it could tell the administration to do, but they weren't listened to. I mean, there's a lot of human nature features involved here as well, but it's intriguing because when I heard someone speak recently who talked about the the LIVs, limited information voters.
Right. I remember hearing
which
you
tend
were
to
the
be
first
something like 50% of the 50% of the people who voted would be called limited information voters who voted on one or two minor things rather than kind of the whole package.
Well, we saw a couple of campaigns. Fortunately, I think things have gotten so scary in this country that it didn't work this time. But wedge issues that worked, they worked against John Kerry, they worked against Al Gore. And it's not just Republicans who use them, but they just had they're not particularly significant issues except to small parts of the population, or they're used to scare people.
Yeah.
And that was you had the whole Willie Horton ads. that go back to the Mike Dukakis. You know, personally, I always blame Dukakis for not fighting back harder. Same thing with Kerry and Gore. But a campaign style that this media just linked with.
Well, I think it's a very popular style in broadcast television to portray political coverage in what's called the horse race metaphor, where it's not about the issues, but it's about who's ahead, who's behind. That's all that's important. And if you look at some of the coverage over the last 6 months of the presidential campaign, you'll see that it's all the top stories are only about who's ahead in what poll. It's not about any.
Well, one of the
true
things I found
issues.
interesting, particularly towards the end, I think there's some people out there who say, well, the media went into the tank for Obama. And I looked at it and said, I mean, because they said that McCain ran a horrible campaign, they're not covering him accurately?
Yeah. You know,
Well, that was part of that was based on people would use numbers and say there were more stories about Obama, but of course,
Or more positive stories about
yeah,
Obama.
or more. Well, even determining positive or negative is subjective, but the fact was that he was essentially the nominee, or fighting to be the nominee for a much longer time than McCain was. So there would tend to be more stories about.
But it was all, I mean, you saw a lot of, I mean, for example, the week that McCain said, I'm shutting down my campaign and flying to Washington to save the economy. I mean, that proved to be a rather disastrous move, as did the Palin nomination. Is accurate coverage, because it reflects badly on somebody, a negative story?
yeah.
I mean,
No.
You know, if you ask a liberal-minded person what they think of the media, they will tell you that they think it's very conservative. If you ask a conservative-minded person what they think of the media, they will tell you that they think it's liberal.
it goes back to we want our beliefs to be reaffirmed.
Goes back to human
Right.
listening.
Right.
And in teaching listening or thinking about it, the process of listening, we listen through our own personal filter. And that filter of values and things we expect to hear or want to hear are so powerful that we miss a lot, and we pick up on that already represents what we think we want to hear. I'm always a little bit suspicious of when I hear people say there are a large number of voters who haven't made up their mind, because I think they say that, but I'm not sure that's really the case.
No, that's an interesting way to end the show. We were talking about one thing, and we'll end on this. Communication majors, they've been around a long time.
Yep. It's communication.
And how big a department is that over here at Monmouth?
We're the largest department at Monmouth University. Almost 600 undergraduate majors, 45 graduate students, 22 full-time faculty, 30 part-time faculty. We have the best facilities on the campus.
Yes, you do.
But of course, we teach all different elements of communication.
If I came in and said I'm a communication major, is there still something called an English major?
Sure.
But that's not part
Large
of the,
English major, yeah.
Not part of the communications department.
No. If you came here to study communication, you could study general human communication, which looks at the way we communicate in a lot of ways, but you could study public relations, journalism, radio, television, film studies.
And Monmouth offers all of that
yeah,
now.
right.
Well, that's impressive, and we do the show over at Monmouth, which, from the city's perspective, we really appreciate.
Which is a wonderful facility. Someone who's been in the industry for a long time. This place is incredible.
We're very proud of it, yes.
And you should be. Well, thank you both very much.
Thank you.
Yeah.